All right, we're on to Algebra Lesson 6-5. This is equations for lines with a given point and slope. I'm going to be going through some examples that are not in the textbook. You do want to read the text, make sure you know the definitions involved, and you pay attention to the material in the tan boxes. The equation for the line given through any given point with any given slope can be determined with the slope-intercept form for the equation. As we're going to find, it also can be determined with other forms of the equation, and we'll show you how that could work out. Let's take a look at our first example. This one, normally the depth of the river is 12 feet. After a torrential downpour, the water is rising at a rate of 1.5 feet per hour. That's a rate, right? That's our slope. Assuming this rate remains steady, find an equation relating the depth of the river d to the time. Okay, time is typically our x-axis. It's the independent variable. The dependent variable is d. And we know a few things right now about this particular problem, that it's rate of rise, and we know where it normally is. So let's take a look at what we have for this particular equation. And normally the depth of the river is 12 feet. So normally that would be when it all began, it was at 12 feet. So depth equals 1.5, and that's feet per hour, times time in hours, plus the starting point, which is 12 feet. That's the normal depth. And so we've got our equation that relates these two populations. So we've written this now in slope-intercept form, and we're good to go. This is all pretty easy. We had our y-intercept, we had our slope given, and we've written the equation. So let's take a look at something where maybe we don't know as much right off the bat. We'd like to look at one where we have a point and a slope, but we need to find the intercept. How would we do that? Well, we know that y equals mx plus b. In this case, m is equal to a -2. So -2 times x plus b. We don't know what b is, but we have one of the points. We know a possible x and y value for this line. So that's one of the points on it. So y is 4, and x is a -1, not parentheses. So -2 times a -1 plus b. Well, we can solve this and find out what b is through this solution. -2 times a -1, negative times a negative is a positive. That's going to be 4 equals 2 plus b. I add the opposite of 2 to both sides. So I have the opposite of 2, opposite of 2. 2 from 4 is 2, and this equals b. So we now know what b equals, and we can write our equation. Y equals a -2x plus 2 is an equation for this line with the point -1, 4, and m equals 2. Let's take a look at this again in a different context. And we'll move this up out of the way. Okay, so how about we find another way to solve this particular problem? Rather than trying to put it into slope-intercept form, is to see if we can solve this knowing a little bit more about it. we know the slope of the line is equal to a negative 2. So remember, we know that y sub 1 minus y sub 2 over x sub 1 minus x sub 2 equals the slope of a line. Well, we have a point here. I'm going to go ahead and use that as our second point. And my first point I will take to be just some y value that works, something I don't know yet. So my y sub 1 is my unknown, minus my y sub 2, which I know, minus 4. My x sub 1 is my unknown, minus the value that I know, which is a negative 1, so minus a negative 1. Minus a minus is going to be a plus, and that equals to the slope, and we know that the slope is equal to a negative 2. Now I want to multiply through by x minus a negative 1, or x plus 1. And if I do that, that'll cancel out here, because this whole term will be multiplied, and it will cancel out. So I'll have y sub 1 minus 4 is equal to a negative 2, the slope, times x sub 1, and I'm going to change this to a plus 1. Well, you'll notice if we look at this particular problem that in this form of the equation, we have an equation for the line, and it's y minus the y point we know, and over here we have the slope of the line times x minus the point. This was a negative 1, so minus a minus is a plus. And so what we've got here is a form of the equation called the point-slope equation of a line. And in point-slope form, we have the points are given. They're immediately given. We have a point for the line. And the slope of the line is given. So we can extract this information. If we were to simplify this and do some manipulation, we're going to find indeed that the slope will be equal to a negative 2, because a negative 2 times x is going to be a negative 2. When we add the 4 to both sides of the equation, a negative 2 times 1 is a negative 2. Negative 2 plus 4 is 2. And so we find that also, like the previous one, that the slope is 2. So that is the point-slope form for an equation. One last bit. I want to kind of go through this as an algorithm. You might want to rewriting this down to keep track of it. It is a quick way to write an equation if you remember how to do it. And so here's our example 2. A line has a slope 4 and its x-intercept is negative 13. Find an equation for the line in point-slope form. You'll notice this is x-intercept, not y-intercept, so it doesn't help us with the y equals mx plus b form. But it's a point. The x-intercept is negative 13, so the point is negative 13 is 0. So hk, represented as a coordinate, is equal to negative 13, 0. And because the slope is 4, m equals 4, so using the point-slope form for the equation, we get y minus k equals the slope of the line, m, times x minus h. Now let's go ahead and we'll substitute into this form now. So that would be y, what's k? K was 0. So y minus 0 equals the slope 4 times x minus h. H was a negative 13. So minus a negative 13 is going to be plus 13. Remember, minus a minus is a plus. So we now have this written in point-slope form And we have substituted for m, h, and k, so y minus 0 equals 4 times x minus a negative 13, or x plus 13. Point slope form. That's it for this lesson. You're going to be getting on with the mastery quiz after covering the ideas and applying the math. Best of luck. If you have questions, you need some help, please come to class and ask.